911, the patient of the emergency.
My father has come up missing. We just searched the property. It's a small farm, and I just found something near the farm that doesn't. I was deployed to Iraq. I've seen what burned up bodies look like, and this looks like a body.
When the patriarch of the Ferris family goes missing, his kids go looking for answers. But what they find is unthinkable. Their father's body on the property's burn pile.
This case had one of those twists that doesn't happen very often.
It was always great on the outside with turmoil on the inside.
She started telling law enforcement to look at Scott.
My personal opinion, I saw her more upset over when her dog died.
What happens when you leave a plate, forget to take it upstairs, a minor temper tantrum. Of course, I had supper tonight and it was fixed for me, so I'm sure I'll be feeling poorly here within minutes, but we'll see.
You do not have to ask yourself, was Gary murdered? When you shrink the world in a case like this, the answer to the question, who did it, sits right there.
There is no reasoning with him. Burn it or die trying.
Gary Ferris weighed nearly 300 pounds. His wife was significantly smaller than he was. And somehow, just 2 days after he was last seen, his remains turned up in a burn pile roughly a football field and a half from the main residence. This is the story of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, and a machine investigators almost overlooked that helped reveal when Gary Ferris died. Alpharetta, Georgia, is the kind of place people move to so nothing bad ever happens to them.
Alpharetta, Georgia is a very quiet, quaint community. It's affluent. What's nice about it is it's a commute distance, so workers can drive into downtown Atlanta. There are large homes, large lots, and even some hobby farms, like the Ferris property.
Quiet roads, hobby farms, good schools, a short drive into Atlanta for work. Gary and Melody Ferris had been together since high school, 38 years married, 4 kids raised, a successful career behind him. Gary was a respected commercial real estate attorney, a partner at his firm, the kind of man his family called Big Daddy. On paper, this was the story of a couple who did everything right.
Gary and Melody Ferris did everything right. They raised 4 kids, Chris, Scott, Emily, and Amanda. And when those kids grew up, they decided to pack up and move to their farm outside of Atlanta. They can now enjoy their empty nest years, build this new chapter together, and create the perfect place for their grandchildren to visit.
But stay with me, because what investigators found inside that house didn't match the photo on the mantel at all.
Scott Ferris lived at the barn that was about a football field and a half, 2 football fields away from the main residence. Melody Ferris and Gary Ferris lived at the main house. That was a 2-story home, and they had several animals, lots of goats, a couple of horses.
I mean, it's just beautiful property. It's about 10 acres. Have you ever seen a Southern Living magazine? That's what this house looks like.
On July 3, 2018, Gary's son Chris stopped by the farm with his daughter for a quick visit. That was reportedly the last confirmed sighting of Gary Ferris alive.
But then, something changes. Gary Ferris, the man that his loved ones affectionately called Big Daddy, goes missing. He hasn't been seen in several days.
No one necessarily really reported him missing. The last that anyone really had heard from him was Chris when he brought his daughter up to the farm Addison on July 3rd to stop by when they came into town.
I had dropped her off. She called me about 10 minutes later and she says, "We can't find Big Daddy." And I said, okay. So I called his phone straight to voicemail. I called my dad all the time on his phone and it goes straight to voicemail. He wasn't on his phone like most people are. So it didn't really raise any eyebrows to me.
He stopped by early evening and stayed maybe an hour or 2 and then drove back down to Buckhead with Addison. No one had heard from him on July 4th.
No one panicked right away. Gary rarely kept his phone on him, and it wasn't unusual for calls to go to voicemail. It wasn't until the next morning, when his car and his keys were found still sitting at the house, that his family understood something was wrong. Gary never went anywhere without that car.
The next morning when I woke up, my sister called me saying, "We can't find him." and his car's here. And when she said his car's here and that his keys are here, then that's when I began to panic, because my dad didn't leave anywhere without going in his car. So I pulled up to the farm, pulled up the driveway, and my mother and my sister, they're sitting on the front steps. I just remember thinking, what do you mean he's missing? Like, you're here, you've been here the whole time. Like, how could he be missing? And I just immediately went to searching. I jumped on the ATV, I went up to the barn. I was gonna search every inch of that farm to make sure he wasn't, laying in the pasture somewhere.
His children began searching the property. And then one of his sons remembered something Gary had mentioned days earlier. He'd been getting the burn pile ready. On a rural property like this, burn piles are ordinary.
I'm searching, my brother starts searching. That's when it kicked in my mind, oh my God, he told me on the 3rd that he was getting that burn pile ready to burn.
Often rural properties, especially expansive properties, people gather up things like wood, old fence material, scrap wood, trash sometimes, and they let these items accumulate, and then they set these large piles on fire and let it burn the wood waste down. They can be dangerous. A little bit of wind can spark up and set the surrounding areas on fire.
And of course, we're all the time, he has to deal with starting fires. I said, Gary, it's dry out. It's dry as toast out. And I said, please don't burn it. And of course, there is no reasoning with it. Burn it or die trying.
Families stack up scrap wood and yard debris and set it alight to clear the land. What wasn't ordinary was what one of Gary's sons found when he took a stick and pushed through the ash. He'd served in Iraq. He knew what a burned body looked like, and what he was looking at now, he told the 911 dispatcher, looked like a body.
I come driving down to that burn pile, and I look, and I didn't see anything. It just looked like it was smoldering, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. And my brother took a stick and was kind of moving some things around, and he looked at me and he said, you need to get the kids the F out of here. I'm calling 911.
County 911, location of the emergency.
My father has come up missing. We just searched the property. It's a small farm, and I just found something near the fire that doesn't. He was burning brush, and now there's stuff in the fire that it could be him. I don't know.
Okay, what is your name?
Gary Ferris.
You said your father?
Yes, sir. Now I'm calling you to say that we've been walking around looking for him, and I went where the fire is still smoldering, and I'm ex-military. I was deployed to Iraq. I've seen what burned up bodies look like, and this looks like a body.
Investigators arriving on scene initially considered the possibility of a tragic accident, a health episode, a fall into the fire. Gary reportedly had a history of medical spells. But that theory collapsed within hours. Because tucked between two of his ribs, pulled straight from the ashes, investigators found a bullet, not a fragment, a full, intact round. The manner of death homicide.
Dental records show that the body that was found in the fire was indeed the body of Gary Ferris.
When they saw the state of Gary's remains, they knew at that point these remains have been on this fire for a significantly long time.
Gary Ferris was a very large man. He was well over 6 feet tall, probably around 300 pounds. At the end of the day, we're talking about probably less than 50 pounds that was recovered or something like that, but there was mainly some skeletal bones remains. An anthropologist comes out and she starts helping process the scene.
There was a set of ribs, about 2 or 3 ribs pulled out of the fire, and there ended up being a full bullet, not even a fragment, a full bullet lodged between 2 ribs into the tissue.
They were able to determine that the death was caused by a gunshot wound to the thoracic, the chest region, with the bullet being lodged in the rib, and they were able to determine that the manner of death was homicide. That changed everything on the scene that day. They knew it was definitely not an accident. It was the scene of a murder.
And once investigators expanded the scene beyond the burn pile, the picture got darker. Inside the main house, a blood trail ran from the kitchen down the stairs into the basement. Gary's basement, the space he'd essentially retreated to after the marriage started falling apart. A second bullet, matching his DNA, was recovered on the floor near the basement's furniture. Gary Ferris had been shot at least twice, inside his own home, and then moved.
Inside the house, they find a blood trail from the kitchen area that goes down the steps into the basement area, and they find not only a blood trail, they also find an actual bullet projectile on the floor by the ottoman.
Testing later revealed that the blood, the DNA on this projectile, was the DNA of Gary Ferris.
We know that there was one bullet in his body, and then we know that there was one through and through with his DNA on it, projectile in the basement. So we know he was at least shot twice.
Here's what you need to sit with for a second. Someone had to physically transport a 6-foot tall, nearly 300-pound man from that basement out to a burn pile roughly the length of a football field and a half away. That single fact would go on to shape almost everything that followed in this case. Because behind the perfect couple image, this family had been unraveling for years. Financial fights were constant. Gary reportedly wouldn't let Melody hold a credit card in her name, frustrated by what he considered exorbitant spending. Melody had been involved in an affair with Rusty Barton, and that relationship continued until Gary was killed. By the time of the murder, Gary and Melody were reportedly living almost separate lives under one roof. Different floors, different routines, a marriage that had quietly become an arrangement.
It was a family that didn't talk about our problems, didn't talk about our issues. It was always great on the outside with turmoil on the inside.
Finances were a large issue in this marriage. Melody's exuberant and exorbitant spending. Gary was a successful lawyer, making a nice paycheck, and it seems that the family was spending that paycheck.
Gary would not allow Melody to have a credit card. He would not have her names on the accounts. Gary did send a message regarding Melody, Scott, and Chris, and all of them spending Gary's money, specifically Melody's. He mentioned to her, "Your profligate spending must stop."
But as detectives continue to investigate, they realize that these money problems are just the tip of the iceberg. There is something else that is causing tension within the family.
My mom decided to step out of the marriage and had an affair with a gentleman named Ted Wiley. That caused a lot of friction in the family, not just between my parents, but between us and my mother. She came back to my dad after he had filed for divorce.
Ultimately, it was a relationship of acceptance that they were going to live two separate lives. They were almost like two ships passing in the night.
She lived on the first floor where the main kitchen was. The second floor was kind of guest bedrooms where the grandchildren would stay and family would stay. And then the bottom floor, which was Gary's domain. And he, for all intents and purposes, lived down there, worked down there, hung out down there, and then he would sleep down there with a CPAP machine.
If you caught that detail about the basement bedroom, a husband sleeping one floor below his wife, alone, with a medical device attached to his face every night, hold on to it. It becomes one of the most important pieces of evidence in this entire case, because Gary used a CPAP machine to sleep. And CPAP machines log data, every night, every session, automatically, whether anyone thinks to check it or not. When investigators pulled that data, they found Gary's machine had powered on every single night for months, like clockwork. Then, after the morning of July 3rd, it never turned on again. A piece of medical equipment nobody was thinking about became the tool that nailed down his time of death.
But investigators, they have to do their due diligence to officially rule him out once and for all, and they need to do that with cold, hard evidence.
When we collected the data from his CPAP machine, we ended up getting this data and being able to show a pattern of behavior for when Gary would go to sleep every night. And he would go to sleep between 11:30 and 1 a.m. It would always turn on at some point for however many hours that he would be sleeping. The data just stopped the morning of the 3rd, so it never was turned on that evening or any other evening thereafter. So based on the CPAP machine, we were able to determine he was murdered the night of the 3rd. The GPS location of Gary's phone was significant because the morning of the 4th, around 6:15, 6:17, Gary's phone moves from the house out to the burn pile. We know Melody's the only one home, and so Melody must have Gary's phone. That was a significant piece of evidence that proved when she was by herself, she must have had Gary's phone because we know Gary was dead.
What's relevant about that is data also showed Scott Ferris's phone was away. Scott Ferris said he was with friends somewhere else. The data supported that. The data showed Melody Ferris was the only person on the property at the time that phone was moving.
Meanwhile, suspicion in the family was already splitting in two very different directions. Melody, when questioned, pointed investigators toward her own son, Scott.
Specifically pointing to one of her own children.
Scott that lives above our barn, he hasn't worked since he came back from Iraq, except for a very short time. And I can't make him work, I can't make him, And I said, Gary, he'll be 35 Saturday. And I said, Gary, he needs to work. He said, well, you don't work. He is enjoying life to the fullest. And, I said, I've got to have some help. I said, if you don't, I'm gonna move you out.
Every bit of his money came directly from his father. He actually resented it to the effect that he would refer to the property as his property. This is my property, this is my home.
My brother worked on the farm instead of having a normal job. It was a full-time job, but my brother wasn't spending all sorts of exorbitant money or anything. My brother worked on the farm and hung out with his friends every once in a while. He wasn't buying new cars. Nothing was even close to the truth of my brother freeloading off my dad.
And when detectives speak with Melody, it's pretty clear how much she resents Scott.
She started telling law enforcement to look at Scott.
A military veteran living in an apartment above the barn, someone she described as hot-tempered.
He had a front row seat to the demise of their marriage. Scott had stated to law enforcement that his mom got so angry at Gary very recently before the murder that they were outside and she brought out a plate that Gary had forgot to bring to the kitchen and slammed that plate down and screamed something to the effect of, I can't wait till he's gone, I can't wait till he's dead. We found a video from July 2nd, which was the day before the murder, where he filmed the remnants of that broken plate.
This is what happens when you leave a plate, forget to take it upstairs, a minor temper tantrum. Of course, I had supper tonight and it was fixed for me, so I'm sure I'll be feeling poorly here within minutes, but we'll see.
And Scott indeed had reasons to be looked at closely. He was large enough to move his father's body. He was the one who told police about a revolver he claimed to have seen in a drawer weeks earlier. A gun that matched the caliber of Gary's wounds, and that had since gone missing. Investigators searched pawn shops, ran metal detectors across the property, sent divers into the farm's small lake. The gun never turned up. But if you think Scott sounds like the obvious suspect here, ask yourself this. Why would he be the one to point police toward a missing gun that implicated himself? Scott took a polygraph. He passed the question that mattered most. Did he participate in his father's death? And phone data placed him away from the property at the time Gary's body was moved. The evidence that once looked damning against him started working in the opposite direction, which brought investigators back to Melody and to something she'd been hiding from almost everyone in her life.
But here's where the investigation takes a dramatic turn. Melody Ferris, the grieving widow, had a lover, a secret romantic partner. This guy's name, Rusty Barton.
In her purse, she had a debit card, a financial transaction card, a credit card of some sort for Roy Barton. Eventually, law enforcement learned that Roy Barton is actually Rusty Barton.
Melody began her relationship with Rusty unbeknownst to a lot of people, to almost everyone. And that relationship continued until Gary was killed.
That caused a lot of issues, as it should. My mother hated my dad, and my dad was trying everything he could do to keep her from having these affairs.
They had been looking at houses. There was a lot of planning going on between the two of them. And I don't think it was just idealistic. I think it was practical planning. And Gary not being in the picture was part of that plan. So I think she wanted that to come to fruition, and she was done waiting for it to, and just made it happen herself.
A secret relationship with a man named Rusty Barton. Search history on his phone showed he'd been looking up wedding rings just days before Gary's murder.
Police track down Rusty Barton, and they confront him directly about his relationship with Melody.
On June 28th, you have search history in your internet search on your phone, searching wedding rings.
Who would you be searching that for?
Probably Melody, because we had talked about if we ever got together, if we ever were us, that we would wear a plain gold band. That was what we talked about, that we would, whether we were, quote, legally married or not.
How's it look that 7 days before her husband was found murdered, you're looking at wedding bands for this woman?
Listen, there is no more Melody. There is no Rusty and Melody from this point forward.
Phone records showed Melody and Rusty on a call together at 2 in the morning on the night Gary died. A call length of an hour the two of them had reportedly never shared before. And when police leaned on Rusty, threatening a conspiracy charge if he didn't cooperate, he agreed to record his future conversations with Melody. On one of those calls, Melody is heard telling him Gary was in the burn pile. A detail, she said, before his remains had even been publicly confirmed.
I think there was only one conversation that is what you're looking for. Probably the last minute of the last conversation, she said, Gary is in the burn pile. No, she said, he is in the burn pile. And I said, what? And she said, he's in the burn pile. And I said, do not say another word and do not tell me anything. I do not need to know. And that is everything.
When she said he is in the burn pile, what was your assumption?
That she had something to do with him.
Yeah.
That he was dead and burning
because I don't, that he was dead and burning up.
That statement was made around the time his remains were found. So obviously, if it was made the night of the 3rd going into the 4th, that is extremely incriminating considering his remains had not been found until July 5th. It shows her knowledge that he was actually dead and she was the only one there at that time.
If you're already doing the math on who knew what and when, you're ahead of where the jury started.
Detectives build their case, they gather evidence, and nearly a year after Gary Ferris was murdered on his property, Melody is arrested. This is a moment that the Ferris family has been waiting for.
Even with all of that, Melody's defense argued this entire case was circumstantial, that a 130-pound woman could not have physically moved a nearly 300-pound man alone, and that investigators had tunnel vision from day one. It was a real question, right up until the state's case was almost finished, when a phone call landed that changed the entire trial.
I received an email actually from the captain of CID with an attachment. There was no body in the email, just an attachment, and it was an MP3, and it was titled Martha Barton.
This case had one of those twists that doesn't happen very often. Martha Jane was the second cousin of Melody Ferris. Melody would drive up and help Martha Jane. Interesting enough, Martha Jane was also a stepmother to Rusty Barton.
This is Martha Barton in Tullahoma, Tennessee.
How are you, ma'am?
Well, I've got a heavy heart.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm sure you're very aware of the case of Melody Ferris that's going on right now.
I am.
My husband gave me a 38 snub nose special. I even bought him a 357 Magnum for Christmas one year. I was very weak one day when she was here, and I told her where several things were that I shouldn't have, but she had a way of, well, she was family. And I told her where those 2 guns were. Well, after she was arrested, the 357 Magnum was there. My 38 Special was gone. I have also searched this house over to see. I mean, I'm not senile. I'm in very poor health, but that gun is gone.
I've had stuff in my trials where you go, oh, that's kind of like a Perry Mason or whatever you want to call it. Martha Jane's introduction to the trial was shocking for everybody. I think the jury had a big impact by that. Outside of the defendant, did you tell anybody else where your pistol was?
No.
Did anybody know you were calling law enforcement?
No, they didn't.
Did you feel like you just had to tell the jury about it?
I felt like it was the right thing to do.
When Martha Jane Barton came forward, that puts a gun in her hand that we didn't have before that we needed the jury to hear about.
An elderly relative of Rusty Barton's, a woman in poor health living in Tennessee, came forward. She told investigators she had once shown Melody where she kept 2 handguns in her home, including a .38 revolver. After Melody's arrest, that revolver was the only one missing.
Following nearly 14 hours of deliberation, the jury comes back with a verdict on all 5 counts. But here's how they do it. They actually go in reverse. They start with count 5, making a false statement.
We, the jury, as to count 5, we find the defendant guilty.
Then count 4, concealing the death of another.
We, the jury, as to count 4, find the defendant guilty.
Count 3, aggravated assault.
We, the jury, as to count 3, we find the defendant guilty.
And then the final 2 counts of malice and felony murder.
We, the jury, as to count 2, find the defendant guilty. And we, the jury, as to count 1, find the defendant guilty.
After nearly 14 hours of deliberation, a Georgia jury found Melody Ferris guilty on all 5 counts, including malice murder. She was sentenced to life, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Gary Ferris was remembered by his children not for how he died, but for who he was before any of this. A father who filmed a home video years earlier, just to say how proud he was of his kids. A man who kept teaching them right from wrong long after they'd grown up and left the house. If a machine that just tracks your breathing at night can end up testifying against the person who killed you, what does that tell you about how hard it actually is to get away with murder in your own home?